Good day, everyone. Happy Saturday. I don't know where you all are. I'm in Washington, D.C., and it's rainy and kind of gray, but it feels good. Feels like spring is coming. Um, so thank you all for joining us. I see we've got 35 of us here, 36, and hopefully the number will continue to grow. My name is Rhonda Chapman. I am the National Equity Director for the Trust for Public Land. We're so glad that you joined us for this 30-minute conversation. I want to say from the start that we really do hope that this can be the first of many conversations with folks, those of us here from the Trust for Public Land. And so if you are interested in digging in a little bit deeper and learning more about our body of work, please feel free to reach out to any of us here, myself, Sean, Donna. I'll introduce them in just a moment. I do have the privilege to work with my newest friends and colleagues at TPL. I've been there for a couple of months in this capacity, and it's exciting. And I'm really honored that I have these folks in the organization that have really been lifting it up for different tenures of time. And it's going to be brief. We may not get to all of the questions. We're going to do our best. I'll be kind of trying to track them as they are presented to me by our awesome tech team. And yeah, so we're going to do our best. So let's get started. Given the time that we have, I first want to turn to Miss Donna Kirkland. Donna, in just a few words, way that you want to introduce yourself. I know that you wear so many hats. I know today is Saturday. I know you could be feeling a whole host of things. So how do you feel like introducing yourself to us today? We've got 64 people. This is incredible.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Rhonda. My name is Donna Kirkland. I am a soon to be 67-year-old African-American woman, as you can see. I've been with the Trust for Public Land for 14 years. The unique part about the relationship between the Trust for Public Land and myself is that I came from the community with no background or knowledge about who the Trust for Public Land was. And back in 2006, someone was thinking out of the box and said, you know what, maybe we should hire someone from the community to be on our team. And through that process, I learned a lot. I shared a lot. I was nurtured a lot and really helped move our mission closer and further a little bit more than what we were when we started. And now where we are today is just, I know it's going to be coming out of the water, especially since we're having relationships and partnerships with all the great folks here. So I'm really excited about this partnership and this day.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. And Sean Terry, I've got the same question for you. I know that, for all of us, our work is only just a portion of the sum of who we are. And so you also wear many hats. And I'm curious which part of yourself you're going to be sharing with us for the next 30 minutes or so.
Thank you, Rhonda, and thank you everyone who's joining us, taking some time on your Saturday to hear from us. I'm here live from Cleveland, Ohio, ground zero for TPL Ohio's Parks for People program. I've been with the organization for a little over a year, and I feel like, I'm a walk-in and breathing advocate for the importance of connecting the parks and recreating in nature. Forever community-minded, total clarity on the importance that parks play in our communities. Having grown up in the city of Chicago, we refer to parks as sort of the backbone to neighborhoods. So I kind of grew up with that mentality when it relates to parks. As a kid, I grew up playing baseball and advanced through recent adulthood, still playing. And the unique thing about baseball is that it is the one competition sport where there's no clock. So you might be in a park playing baseball for 4 hours. And from the south side of Chicago on 63rd and Stony Island, you can read the entire pulse of the south side from center field. So I owe a lot of my perspective around parks, and we'll get into that in a little bit, just from my humble upbringing. But my path to where I am today is somewhat of an unconventional one. And I always like to credit the institutions that sort of introduced me on a more formal level to the importance of nature. So credit to the Chicago High School for Agricultural Sciences for giving me the early exposure to agriculture on a much larger level than just farming. And that curiosity and exposure led me to Alabama A&M University, where I was an environmental science major before focusing on urban planning. Was a USDA 1890 scholar and served in several internships with the Forest Service. And that sort of dichotomy of urban and rural and the perspective that it gave me is still with me today. So shout out to Alabama A&M University. I saw several Bulldogs, including keynote Dr. Easley earlier this week. So shout out to the Bulldogs. Yeah, so that's just a little bit about me, Rhonda, and my background here as a representative of the TPL.
I love it. Now, here's the thing, though. As you were speaking, I'm like, oh, don't be putting all that out there. Someone's going to try to take you away from us. So please just hold fast. Donna, same for you. I don't want people coming in here trying to scoop you up, but I will celebrate your victory wherever you decide to place it. So I appreciate you both for being here. I think if I'm not mistaken, this is your first experience with Taking Nature Black. And I know that we've had our own conversation offline about what our experience has been and just the benefit and the value of being in this space where we can bring our fullest selves in a way that we don't have to be concerned about how people are perceiving us. We don't have to be concerned about judgment. And I think that's just a really great way to set up this conversation. We're here to talk about engaging in Black communities and how we can more or less democratize our work, how we can use parks as a means to build power. And with that, I'll say that I actually struggle with the word power sometimes. And I would love to hear from each of you about how you conceptualize power, how you define it in the communities or the neighborhoods where you're bringing your leadership. And so I'll kick it over to you, Sean, to go first, and then we'll pass it over to Donna.
I agree with you 100%, Rhonda. I struggle with the terminology as well. So I'll start there. I mean, we have to constantly maintain a social relevance in our language and then sort of adapt to the current consciousness. In the parks and open space world, there's a common nomenclature where terms like land ownership, community policing, those are all frequently used, and they all have different connotations depending on where you are geographically. Historically, you know, particularly for the Black community, when we hear terms like that, they evoke generational trauma that dates back over 400 years. So we have to be careful with language when we talk about, you know, especially when we talk about power in parks. I'd say as a resident constituent empowerment, it for me means having the freedom to function in these spaces in our most unapologetic selves, right? It means having the freedom to openly connect with people that don't look like us without having that victim mindset. And it also means being real with, you know, some of the issues that we have to deal with in our own communities. Oftentimes, some of the most negative aspects in our community bleeds out into the park, whether that's drugs, guns, gang activity, etc. We have to sort of elevate the standard in how we view our parks and how we function within them. And from that respect, there is a degree of ownership that comes with that, but with that ownership comes responsibility.
You got me over here taking notes, Sean. I love that. I appreciate that. Donna, what about you when you think about what power might look like or what it maybe doesn't look like or how you choose to define it in the work that you're leading in New Jersey, up around the Newark area? How does that show up for you?
I want to piggyback off of Sean, but I want to go on the side of the community and get to the core of a lot of problems that arise in our community. And, you know, when we're doing this park work, playground work, we have a direct connection with the community, hear all of the different issues and injustices that they're dealing with. And each community is totally different. And so once we've come in and put in some sweat equity and gained that trust and start listening. And so because we've built that park and playground, it's really an open resource center, because we've gone through participatory design when we build these spaces, and the community are the ones that's leading it. And so when we're going in to help with programming, they're leading there, and we're participating and pulling all the different resources and partnerships to get to the core of a lot of the ailments and injustices, mental illness, substance abuse that's going on. And so our work is bigger than just the space. And that's why community is in the center, and equity means all of the things that makes a community whole. So that's the way that we, the direction that we start in Newark and continue.
That's great. That is spot on. I just want to take a quick pause to say that I'm probably going to get to the questions at the end of our questions. So folks, I want you to know that I see you populating questions. I'm going to do everything we can to get to them. So then the other thing, and Donna, you started to touch on this, you know, the Trust for Public Land takes pride in our work in parks as a tool for health and engagement and connectivity. And Donna, you started to name that. And we know that the pandemic has really elevated the need for folks to go outside so that we can support our collective health. And so how have you seen park access and quality in your work, or how people are utilizing the parks, or, you know, as a result of this pandemic, I'm also curious about the level of participation, whether or not you all have seen an increase outside. It's kind of challenging, right? Because, you know, they say shelter in place and some folks freeze and I'm not going outside. You know, that's what we'll hear from some folks. And then you'll see folks that might have some children, or even folks that have a child like mine, like myself, who needs to go out and play all the time. I'm curious if you've been seeing the results of the pandemic bring people out into the commute, into parks more or less, and whether they're connecting differently than they had been prior to 2020.
So in Newark and a lot of places that we build these parks, they're pocket parks, a little bit bigger, maybe 9 acres. And in Newark, the parks was closed. And so you have all these housing and complexes that children have to stay inside, because there is no backyard in the front yard in most of the neighborhoods. And then there's curfews. And then there's the virtual learning. And the, you know, it's a lot of dynamics, the older sibling trying to help the younger sibling. Mm-hmm. And so people wanted to go to the parks, but they were locked down, but everything went virtual. And so our role was to be the beat of the drum and pass that information on to our friends, that groups that we support around the parks that we built, and partners, and go that way. But folks wanted to get out into the parks, but they were closed. And of course, people hung out. This is where domestic violence starts. So the pandemic really put a toll on a lot of our communities, because people didn't have any place to go to breathe. But we had a lot of people, you know, delivering food. So other little pockets were filling in, but it didn't take care of the whole. It opened the door to really what the problems are in our areas, in urban areas and rural areas for people.
I appreciate that. And it sounds like there's a responsibility. I think you used the word, or maybe it was Sean, somebody used the word around responsibility that we have, and that accountability. And so while the parks are a vehicle, if we are truly going to be engaging in a holistic way, there are those issues that you're naming, Donna, that we also need to be prepared to respond to, and make sure that we bring the right partnerships inside of our connections so that we can actually do that. So I appreciate you naming that, because parks are a part of a whole picture, right? Sean, what about you? What have you been seeing in the Cleveland area in terms of the level of engagement as a result of the pandemic?
Absolutely. So last spring was actually my first spring summer cycle here in Cleveland. So I was really interested to see how the community and people in Cleveland would respond, just in general to the change of weather, but then certainly under the you know the pandemic and the conditions that created. Like I mentioned in the lead in, I'm a walking, breathing advocate. So for me, it was like, I got to get outside. I got to walk the dog. I got to bike, but I need to go to different places to see how other people are responding to this. Quite frankly, it obviously is nobody's happy with dealing with a pandemic, but there was sort of a glimmer of a silver lining in that it sort of forced us to get back into embracing parks and outdoor spaces in our communities. Cleveland's no different than many other cities in that respect. But at the same time, just because parks are trending again, it doesn't mean that we have to continue to build on that same old status quo. And somehow COVID sort of unearthed those same disparities, right? So when the park is open, but a basketball court is locked and the rims and the goalposts are removed, those parks that may not have a variant diversity in terms of the types of amenities offered, we saw people just, really struggling to connect in those spaces. And I look at that the same way that I look at the underutilized resource that is a baseball diamond, right? So in African American communities, oftentimes we see baseball diamonds go underutilized because we're not playing the sport as much anymore. And so that disparity, that lack of amenity offered, that variation offered, can oftentimes result in, like Donna mentioned, some of those negative things happening. Again, it goes back to being able to occupy the space, being able to have functional use of the space. And so in some respects, COVID, it was exciting to see people get back to embracing outdoors, but then also it sort of turned a glaring eye to where are these communities, where are these parks located, where there is variation and people can, benefit from a number of different things in the park versus those spaces where maybe all there is a basketball court and a rec center that is only part-time staffed. So we see that disparity, and it only goes to reinforce the focus that we have on in Cleveland in terms of our Parks for People program and building up the equity in parks citywide.
Great, thank you so much. So we've got about 12 minutes left, and I know that I have a final question that I wanted to ask, but there are a couple of questions that have come up in the chat that I think I would like to introduce to both you and Donna, and you all can choose between you, whether you both want to answer or not, it's up to you, but I'm sure you both have something to say. And these are also questions that I know I've been experiencing inside the organization as we're trying to talk about what are equitable parks? What does that really mean? What are we really shifting when we think about, traditionally, Trust for Public Land has been seen as a conservation organization, but really we're that and then some, right? And so as we're moving forward and probably for, perpetuity with the organization, equity is going to continue to be at the center. And it is about a very race driven, right? That's what we're really prioritizing right now. So we have a question here about how parks can kind of serve as spaces to bring people of varied backgrounds together to build fellowship and end racism. Now, the end racism, it's not that, that's a challenge. Can parks end racism? And if it can't end racism, the process of building fellowship, is that something that we see in racial and ethnic diversity in the parks being an opportunity for that? What do you think?
Donna, I'll defer to you on that one. I feel like you all may have done a little bit more of that than we've gotten around to in Cleveland.
So when we start the process of designing the parks and playgrounds, the audience is the community at hand. And a lot of times it is Black and brown people. And so we're bringing community together from different races to help design this park. So that's, keying in equity because they're the ones that's leading what's going to be in there. And then once we built that parking playground, we're already looking for friends groups, community people to form this group to steward these sites. And those people are the same people that's in the community. And then we support events, and they plan those events. Again, they're fellowshipping and networking. But even better than that, we're doing that right now in the Trust for Public Land when I'm talking and Sean is talking to our Latinx and other folks of color, so that we can better understand the culture more ourselves. And that's why it's so important to have a reflection of the community when we're out doing this work. And because that bridges the gap right at the beginning.
Yeah, no, I agree. I often say I'm not your voice. I'm just a means and a platform for other folks being able to be emboldened and express themselves. And as an organization, TPL, we're not going to go into a community and try and take over. You know, it's important that we connect with those local organizations on the ground that have the pulse of the residents, who have the long-standing relationships, who are the stakeholders and know the stakeholders and can really galvanize groups so that we can come in and sort of provide a process to make, you know, the discussion a little bit more amenable and transparent. So I'll conclude with that.
Awesome. Well, it actually feeds into another question where they're asking, quote, what's the best way to make Latinx / Hispanic and Black, Indigenous, and other people of color feel welcome on public lands? We recall, you know, it's the one story that is being told over and over again, necessarily so, but it's also not the only story about what we saw last year with the Black birder in Central Park, right? Where that individual Black man trying to look at some birds was accosted, and it was a very unsafe situation. And that's not the first. Black and brown people have been unsafe in parks and public lands on many occasions. I know that I have several stories to share. So what do you think the best way, how do we address that safety so that, you know, folks of color can go into these spaces without any fear for whether or not they have a sense of belonging, whether or not they're welcome, but actually have an opportunity to fully be themselves, to use your language, Sean, that we can show up unapologetically? What's the best way to address that?
Yeah, I mean, first off, we can't dictate user behavior in parks, right? I mean, short of anything, you know, obviously illegal activity, but to pull up and decide that you want to barbecue in the park and play music, you know what I mean? Like we have to be in a position where we receive how people view the park, you know, as an extension of their home, really. So I think that's first and foremost. Embracing sort of the commonalities, you know, food, festive, music. I mean, those are all things that most people enjoy, and we have to find ways to incorporate that into parks, whether that's, you know, through programming or special events, and then being open to inviting other cultures into the space for opportunities to overlap.
What do you think, Donna?
So I would add Riverfront Park that we've done in Newark has like house party days and hip hop days, and it brings everybody together at the River Days at Riverfront Park. And so it's a lot about programming. The you know, the park rangers or whoever is looking after these public lands need to be a mixture of the people that's coming in as well, because then you feel a little bit more safe when you see some folk that look similar to you. So I'll stop there.
Well, you absolutely don't need to, but thank you. And I just want to share that there is an additional question that somebody else was asking about the method, which methods are being used to improve the perception of safety while people are enjoying them. And, you know, I'll just jump in real quick, even though I'm not the panelist. One of the things that I know I've heard, particularly from some younger folks, about engaging in the bigger parks that are not in our neighborhoods, in our communities. So say some of our national parks, the places that are iconic. There is, Sean, you named trauma at the start of this conversation and around the language of public ownership and community policing. And one of the things that I heard named was that, we got 5 minutes, was that showing up to a space where we have people in uniform. We have park police sometimes, and we have park rangers, and the rangers can sometimes be in a uniform that looks like law enforcement. And so when you've been conditioned and have experienced trauma that can come from uniformed individuals, do you think that that might be something that we can encourage a pivot to exist, where maybe folks still be in uniform, but maybe it doesn't have to look like enforcement, where folks can walk into a space and not see a badge and a hat and a taser, perhaps? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of policing needing to get back to being more on foot and bike. I think just the sheer act of pulling up in a squad car or some type of vehicle with lights blaring it sort of sets the tone for what an interaction can be like. To approach a uniformed officer on foot or on bike, it has a different and they're often wearing different types of uniforms, right? They may be, if they're on bike, they may be, in shorts, and they may not have as many apparatuses equipped on themselves. So that in and of itself creates a little bit less stressful of an interaction. So I do think that we need to discuss and address how that police presence looks and feels, because that at the very jump, it kind of creates what that impression and what that interaction is going to be like.
Yep.
And of course, I'm going to go back to programming, the partnerships with the police department, having haircut with a cop or have donuts with a cop is some of the things that we've done. And also have like the Explorers clubs with the youth that are thinking about becoming police officers at these events. And so you form a relationship and you take down some of those barriers to start conversation and dialogue. So again, programming and partnerships, collaborations.
Yep. Thank you. We've got 3 minutes left, and I just want to share a quick, if we can get it in, I want to see if you all can make a case for why we need to be investing in quality parks, particularly in Black communities, as well as low-income communities, and why the Trust for Public Land, why our work really matters. And the question is open to both of you. I wanted to share a story, but we don't have time.
I'll just say that if we're going to be honest about and intentional about diversity and inclusion, it's a two-way conversation. We got to understand that access voids have just as much to do with pedestrian integration and sidewalk integrity as they do community policing in the anti-snitching culture, right? Like there's a vacuum that dictates how we communicate in our community. So I think it's important to understand that. I think it's important to also understand that there's economic impacts and benefits that our communities can stand to benefit exponentially from. And so in our work, the fact that we have a breadth of research and innovation and conservation economics, TPL is taking a very holistic approach to how we address parks and park improvements. And I can wax on, for hours on end about that, but I want to leave room for Donna too.
So I'll take just a second. So another thing that's really great is that it prepares the next generation of environmentalists because of the design and the involvement from beginning all the way to end. And so it's exposing the community to our different partners and partnerships. And we got one thing that we are advocates for also is that when we're building these new parks and playgrounds, we don't want to start gentrification that usually happens in our community. And so our eyes and ears is around everything holistically and intergenerationally in the work that we do.
I love it. Anti-displacement, intergeneration, safety, speaking a language that is true to how we show up in these spaces, making these investments, economic benefits, community agreements. There's all kinds of reasons for us to be investing in our parks and communities. I thank you all, Sean and Donna, you're amazing. Thank you all the folks who participated. Apologies that we were not able to get to your questions. I wish you all the best. We're at time. Peace and love.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.